The polished marble floor felt cold and indifferent beneath the worn soles of his simple work boots, a stark contrast to the simmering heat of humiliation that was rising in his chest. Arthur Vance stood at the periphery of the vibrant, cacophonic celebration, an island of quiet stillness in a sea of champagne flutes and shrill laughter. He clutched a small, intricately carved wooden bird in his gnarled hand, its smooth, familiar shape a small anchor in the overwhelming tide of ostentation. This was his son's house. A house built on a lie. A house built on his name. His son, Daniel, approached him, not with a welcoming embrace, but with a face tight with irritation. Beside him, his wife, Chloe, was a vision in silk and disdain, her eyes sweeping over Arthur's frayed collar and faded denim jacket, as if he were a piece of trash someone had forgotten to take out. "I thought we told the caterers to use the back entrance," she said, her voice a saccharine weapon aimed not at him, but at a guest standing nearby, ensuring they heard the casual cruelty. Daniel let out a short, bitter laugh. "Dad, what are you doing here? We're trying to entertain. You're making people uncomfortable." Arthur didn't respond. His gaze was fixed on the house itself, a monstrous cathedral of glass and steel that clawed at the night sky. He saw the impossible cantilever of the second-floor terrace, the sheer weight of the unsupported roofline. It was audacious. It was arrogant. And it was deeply, fundamentally flawed. To them, he was just an old man, a janitor, a relic of a forgotten past, a source of perpetual embarrassment. But they were standing in a house built on a foundation of deceit, a structure whose very beams and joists were cemented with fraud. And they had no idea who they were truly speaking to. His silence was not one of submission, but of profound, heavy judgment. He saw the stress fractures that were not yet visible, the inevitable sag that would come with the first heavy snow, the slow, certain collapse that was encoded in its very design. This house was a metaphor for their lives, a beautiful, glittering facade hiding a hollow, unstable core. The small wooden bird in his hand felt heavier now, a testament to a different kind of building, a different kind of value. He had carved it from a piece of reclaimed oak, its grain telling a story of 100 years. It was a gift he could no longer give. Welcome to Moral Compass Stories, where we explore the hidden strength that lies in humility and the ultimate, resounding triumph of honor over arrogance. The world often judges by appearances, by the shine of new things, but true value, the kind that endures, is forged in fire and tempered by integrity. If you believe in the power of quiet dignity, if you believe that character is the only currency that truly matters, then make sure you are subscribed to our channel and have turned on all notifications. You will not want to miss the final, stunning revelation of this story, a moment where a lifetime of silence is broken by an undeniable truth. This is a story about a father, a son, and a debt that could not be measured in dollars, but only in the weight of a name. The weight of a legacy. The name was Vance, and tonight, that name would be reclaimed. The guests swirled around them, oblivious, their laughter echoing in the cavernous space. Daniel's face was a mask of strained patience. "Seriously, Dad, you need to go. This is a big night for us. For me. Don't ruin it. Ruin it." The words hung in the air between them, thick and poisonous. Arthur looked at his son, at the expensive suit that seemed to wear him, at the desperate hunger in his eyes. He saw not a man, but a child playing dress-up, convinced that the costume was real. Arthur's life was a testament to the opposite principle. For 20 years, he had been a ghost. He had been Arthur Vance, custodian at Northgate Community College. He arrived before the sun, his footsteps echoing in the empty halls. He pushed a broom, he mopped floors, he emptied trash cans filled with the detritus of young lives full of promise. He was invisible, a silent fixture in the background of 1,000 other stories. His colleagues, the other members of the maintenance staff, knew him as Art. A quiet man who kept to himself, who ate his lunch alone, reading thick, heavy books with strange diagrams. They saw his calloused hands and assumed a lifetime of simple, hard labor. They were not wrong, but they were not right. The calluses were not from a broom handle. They were from the rough-hewn timber of a 1,000-year-old cedar, from the cold steel of a framing hammer, from the fine-toothed blade of a Japanese saw. They were the calluses of a master builder, a man who had once shaped skylines. He lived in a small third-floor apartment that smelled of old books and lemon oil. The furniture was sparse, simple, but everything in it was perfect. The joints of his simple wooden bed frame were so tight, they seemed to have grown together. The bookshelves, which he had built himself, bowed slightly under the weight of hundreds of volumes on structural engineering, classical architecture, and material science. On a small workbench in the corner, A collection of half-finished wooden animals stood in silent testament to the skill that still lived in his hands. He had once been another man, a man known in certain, rarefied circles as the architect. His firm, Vance and Sterling, had been a beacon of innovation and, more importantly, of integrity. He didn't just build structures, he built legacies. He turned down more projects than he accepted, refusing to work with clients who valued profit over people, spectacle over substance. His creed was simple: a building should feel like it has a soul. Then came the betrayal. Sterling, his partner, his friend since university, had been running a shadow company, siphoning funds, cutting corners on materials, a quiet, systematic deception that had rotted the firm from the inside out. When the collapse came, it was catastrophic. The lawsuits, the public disgrace, the financial ruin. Sterling vanished, leaving Arthur to face the wreckage. The authorities saw Arthur as a victim, but he saw himself as the captain of a sinking ship. He liquidated everything he owned: his homes, his savings, his art collection. He spent a year personally meeting with every client, every subcontractor, every employee, ensuring that every single debt was paid, every person made whole. He refused to declare bankruptcy. It was a matter of honor. When it was over, he had nothing left but his name, a name now tarnished in the public eye. So he let it die. He became Art, the janitor. He did it to protect his family, to shield a young Daniel from the shame and the creditors. He had hoped that by stepping back, by living a life of humble service, he would teach his son a lesson about what truly mattered. He had failed. Daniel and Chloe were the living embodiment of everything he had fought against. Their lives were a curated performance for an audience that didn't care. Their conversations were about acquisitions, about appearances, about the brands they wore and the vacations they posted. They saw their father's quiet life not as a choice born of principle, but as a pathetic failure. They pitied him. They were ashamed of him. They never once asked him about his past, about the books he read, about the sadness that sometimes flickered in his eyes. They simply assumed his story began and ended with a janitor's closet. And that ignorance, that profound, willful blindness, was about to bring their glittering world crashing down around them. The inciting moment had not been the party, but a single piece of paper that had arrived a week before. An envelope from a prestigious bank, embossed with a logo that represented old money and ruthless efficiency. It was addressed to Mr. Arthur Vance. Inside, the language was cold and clinical. A final notice. A demand for payment on a mortgage of a sum that made his breath catch in his throat. The property address was the one he was standing in front of now. He had sat at his small kitchen table, the letter shaking slightly in his hand. He recognized the forgery of his signature instantly. It was a clumsy imitation, capturing the shape of the letters but none of the flow, none of the pressure, none of the life that a man's hand learns over 70 years. It was the signature of a stranger. He had called his son. The connection crackled, Daniel's voice distant and impatient. "Dad? What is it?" "I'm in the middle of something." Arthur's voice was low, steady, a counterpoint to his son's frantic energy. "Daniel, we need to talk. About a loan." There was a pause. "What loan?" "Dad, I told you, everything is handled. It's all good." The casual dismissal was like a blade. "A mortgage from Sterling Trust Bank. The final notice arrived today. It's in my name." The silence on the other end of the line was suddenly heavy, guilty. When Daniel finally spoke, his voice was laced with a new, sharp-edged condescension. "Look, it was just a formality. A technicality. Your credit, from whatever you did before, it was better than mine. The bank needed a stronger guarantor. It's just paperwork, Dad. Don't worry your old head about it. I'm the one making the payments." He had hung up before Arthur could respond, leaving the dial tone to buzz in his ear like an angry insect. The phrase "don't worry your old head about it" echoed in the small apartment. It was the deepest cut of all. The dismissal not just of his intelligence, but of his entire existence. The next day, he had gone to the bank. He wore his clean, pressed work clothes, the best he had. He sat in a plush leather chair that felt alien and unwelcoming, waiting for the branch manager. A man named Peterson, with a sleek suit and an even sleeker smile, had finally called him in. Peterson looked at the letter, then at Arthur, his eyes lingering on the worn fabric of his jacket. The polite smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mr. Vance, I have your file here. A loan of this magnitude, for a property in the Elysian Hills development, it's quite substantial." He tapped a manicured finger on a screen. "My records indicate your stated profession is a custodian at the community college. Is that correct?" "Yes," Arthur said. Peterson leaned back, a look of practiced sympathy on his face. "Sir, with all due respect, it's not uncommon at a certain age for confusion to arise. Are you certain you're not mistaken about this? Perhaps a different loan. A smaller one?" Arthur's gaze was unflinching. "The signature on that loan application," he said, his voice quiet but clear as a bell, "is a forgery." Peterson's condescending smile finally vanished, replaced by a flash of irritation. He saw not a man of principle, but a nuisance. An old man causing problems. "That is a very serious accusation, sir," he said, his tone turning to ice. "Our legal department verifies all signatures. I can assure you, the paperwork is in order." He stood up, a clear dismissal. "If you wish to contest this, you'll have to do so through official channels. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other clients to attend to." As Arthur walked out of the bank, the heavy glass doors swinging shut behind him, he knew that official channels were not enough. A lesson had to be delivered. A foundation had to be shaken. And it had to happen in the house that pride and deceit had built. He would not go there to yell or to accuse. He would go there to bear witness, to see the full scope of his son's ambition and his son's folly. He would go there to stand in the middle of the lie and force it to confront the truth of a man they had long since forgotten, a man they had never truly known. The housewarming party was a symphony of calculated excess. A string quartet played softly in one corner, their classical music drowned out by the thumping bass of a pop song from another. Waiters in crisp white jackets weaved through the throngs of people, balancing trays of glistening hors d'oeuvres and sparkling wine. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the self-congratulatory hum of the newly successful. Arthur Vance moved through it all like a ghost, an anomaly of quiet purpose in a world of frantic performance. He had walked in through the front door, which had been left wide open, an invitation to a world he did not belong to. No one stopped him. They saw his simple clothes, his age, his weathered face, and their minds filled in the blanks. He was a contractor finishing a late job, a grandfather of one of the staff, a lost neighbor. He was invisible, and his invisibility was his shield. He bypassed the swirling vortex of the party and walked towards the massive wall of glass that overlooked the canyon below. His hand, the one not clutching the small wooden bird, came up and rested gently on the cool surface. He wasn't admiring the view. He was feeling for vibrations, for the subtle stress that glass endures when it is not properly supported. His eyes traced the line where the glass met the ceiling, noting the almost imperceptible bow in the steel beam above. A novice's mistake, a fatal one in time. It was here that Maya first saw him. She was a young culinary student, working for the catering company to pay her tuition. She was tired, her feet ached, and she was intimidated by the sheer opulence of it all. She watched the old man by the window, so different from everyone else. He wasn't eating, he wasn't drinking, he wasn't talking. He was studying. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, his head tilted as if listening to the house itself. She saw him run his calloused fingers along a joint where a wooden beam met a stone pillar. She saw him squint at the exposed ductwork high on the ceiling. She saw a look on his face that was not admiration, but a kind of deep, professional sorrow. It was the look of a doctor examining a terminal patient. It was then that she overheard the exchange between the hosts and the old man. She was refilling a tray of canapes nearby when Chloe and Daniel cornered him. She heard Chloe's cruel remark about the hired help. She saw the flash of anger and embarrassment on Daniel's face. She saw the old man's complete and utter stillness. He did not flinch. He did not argue. He simply absorbed the insult, his gaze never leaving the flawed structure of the house around him. Maya felt a pang of something sharp and protective. There was a dignity about him that made their wealth and their beauty seem cheap and ugly. She saw Daniel lean in, his voice a harsh whisper. "What are you doing here, Dad? I told you. This isn't the place for you." The word Dad hit her with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a lost neighbor. This was their father. The father they were treating with such open, casual contempt in front of all their new, important friends. The scene was so profoundly wrong that she had to look away. She busied herself at her station, but her eyes kept drifting back. She saw Chloe whisper to a woman dripping in diamonds, gesturing towards Arthur with a flick of her wrist. "He gets these moments of confusion," Chloe said, her voice carrying across the room. "It's sad, really." The lie was so effortless, so complete. Maya watched as the old man, Arthur, turned away from them and began to walk the perimeter of the great room. His steps were measured, his focus absolute. He was a building inspector in a world of blind residents. He was seeing the truth of the place, and the truth she suspected was terrifying. The disconnect between the man she was observing and the man his son and daughter-in-law were describing was a chasm. One was a figure of quiet strength and profound knowledge. The other was a caricature of senility and social ineptitude. Maya knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her gut, which one was real. She decided to keep watching him. She felt like she was the only other person in that entire house who saw him at all. And she felt, for reasons she couldn't explain, that something monumental was about to happen. The air in the room was growing thick with unspoken tension, the music a thin veneer over a rising tide of conflict. Daniel, his face flushed with a mixture of alcohol and rage, finally broke away from a sycophantic conversation with a city councilman and strode towards his father. He grabbed Arthur's arm, his grip surprisingly strong, and pulled him towards a secluded alcove behind a large, abstract sculpture. "I am not going to say this again," Daniel hissed, his voice low and trembling with fury. "What are you trying to do? Are you trying to destroy my life? After everything I've done, everything I've built for myself? Everything I have built." The words were a monument to his own self-deception. Arthur looked down at his son's hand on his arm, then back up at his face. For the first time that evening, he spoke more than a single word. His voice was raspy and used. "I came to give you this," he said, and held up the small wooden bird. It was a kingfisher, its wings caught in mid-flight, its tiny eyes carved with impossible detail. A symbol of peace and prosperity. A housewarming gift. Daniel stared at the object as if it were a dead insect. He let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "A toy? You came here to give me a little wooden toy. This is a multi-million-dollar estate, Dad. Not a log cabin. What am I supposed to do with this?" He knocked the bird from Arthur's hand. It fell to the marble floor with a soft, pathetic clatter. "It's just a house, Dad," Daniel said, his voice dripping with a lifetime of resentment and perceived superiority. "Something you would never understand." Chloe appeared at his side, her presence like a drop of poison in a glass of water. Her face was a mask of cold fury. "We have had enough," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Our guests are staring. You have become a spectacle. You need to leave. Now." She placed her hands on Arthur's chest and gave him a firm shove towards the main exit. It was a shocking act of disrespect, a line crossed. Arthur didn't move. It was not an act of defiance, but of simple physics. He was rooted to the spot, his body possessed of a density that her flimsy aggression could not budge. He was no longer a ghost. He was a mountain. He was silence and stillness, and his silence was a roar that drowned out all the noise of the party. The guests had indeed started to notice. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. The string quartet trailed off, one violin holding a high, reedy note that sounded like a question. A circle of silence began to expand around the family tableau in the alcove. Everyone could feel the shift. The manufactured joy of the party had evaporated, replaced by the raw, authentic drama of a family tearing itself apart. Maya, the caterer, watched from across the room, her heart pounding. She saw the bird on the floor. She saw Chloe's shove. And she saw the old man's immovable dignity. As he stood there, absorbing their hatred, his right hand, which had been hanging limp at his side, fiddled with something from his pocket. It was not the bird. It was a pencil. A simple, silver-colored mechanical pencil, its finish worn smooth with age. It had a small, barely visible insignia stamped on its clip, a stylized letter, V, intertwined with a compass rose. She didn't recognize the symbol, but it looked ancient, official. It seemed to hum with a forgotten importance. It was the kind of object that a man carries for a lifetime. A tool, a totem, a key. And then, as if summoned by the sheer gravitational pull of the moment, the world outside the house changed. The quiet suburban street was suddenly filled with the low, powerful growl of expensive engines. A procession of sleek, black sedans, their tinted windows like the eyes of predatory animals, slid to a silent stop in front of the house. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the stunned faces of guests who had wandered onto the lawn. The party music died completely. The only sound was the synchronized opening of car doors and the soft, authoritative crunch of expensive leather shoes on the gravel driveway. From the lead car, a figure emerged. He was an older man, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a bespoke suit that probably cost more than Maya's car. He moved with the unshakable confidence of a man who did not simply walk through the world, but owned it. His hair was a shock of silver, and his face was a mask of stern authority. This was a man accustomed to being obeyed. This was a king arriving in a court of jesters. Daniel and Chloe's faces transformed in an instant. The anger and irritation vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed awe, quickly followed by a greedy, sycophantic excitement. "Oh my God," Chloe breathed. That's Alistair Blackwood." Daniel was already moving, straightening his tie, plastering a wide, welcoming smile on his face. Alistair Blackwood. The name itself was a legend. He was the founder and CEO of Blackwood Holdings, the most powerful and prestigious construction and development firm on the planet. He was a titan, a demigod in the world of real estate and finance that Daniel so desperately wanted to conquer. To have him appear at their housewarming party was more than a dream come true. It was a coronation. "Mr. Blackwood, what an incredible honor." Daniel gushed, practically running to greet him at the door. "I'm Daniel Vance. This is my wife, Chloe. We are so thrilled you could make it." Chloe was right behind him, her hand extended, her smile radiant. They were certain he was there for them. They thought their moment had finally, truly arrived. They were about to be anointed. Alistair Blackwood, however, did not seem to see them. His piercing blue eyes, cold as a winter sky, swept over their eager faces without a flicker of recognition. He walked past them as if they were pieces of furniture, his gaze scanning the hushed, gawking crowd. His team of executives, all sharp suits and sharper eyes, fanned out behind him, securing the room with their sheer presence. The air crackled with power. The party was over. A reckoning had begun. Blackwood's eyes finally found what they were looking for. They locked onto the quiet, still figure in the alcove. The stern, intimidating mask on his face dissolved, replaced by something utterly shocking, a look of profound, deeply felt, almost reverent respect. He walked directly towards Arthur, his footsteps the only sound in the cavernous, silent room. The crowd of guests, a moment before so loud and self-important, parted for him as if by instinct, a silent acknowledgement of a power they could not comprehend. He stopped a foot in front of Arthur. Daniel and Chloe stood frozen near the doorway, their smiles collapsing, their faces a canvas of utter confusion. This was not happening the way they had imagined. This was not about them at all. "Arthur," Blackwood said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that seemed to make the very air vibrate. It was a voice used to commanding boardrooms and moving markets, but now it was filled with an emotion that bordered on awe. "I thought I might find you here." He placed a hand gently on Arthur's shoulder, a gesture of deep affection and respect. Then he turned. He faced the room, his gaze sweeping over the sea of stunned faces, finally landing with the force of a physical blow on Daniel and Chloe. "You people," he began, his voice dropping to an ice-cold whisper, "stand here celebrating in this building." He said the word building, as if it were an obscenity. "You drink your champagne and compliment the grotesque decor, but you have no idea. You have no idea in whose presence you truly stand." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle into the crushing silence. His gaze found Daniel again. "You call yourself a developer. You trade in land and property. But you know nothing of the craft. You know nothing of the soul of a structure." He gestured dismissively at the house around them. "This place. This is a vulgar imitation. A poorly executed copy of an early Vance design, stolen from a monograph published 30 years ago. A cheap knockoff built by people who can read plans but cannot understand them." His voice began to rise, filled with a righteous anger. The man who designed the original, the man who conceptualized this flow of space, would never have made these mistakes. The foundation is miscalculated by a factor of 2. The load-bearing walls are wholly insufficient to support the cantilevered terrace you are so proud of. The steel beams are a lower grade than specified. I estimate that in 5 years this luxurious house will have suffered critical, catastrophic structural failure. It is not a home. It is a time bomb. He then turned back to Arthur, and his voice softened again, becoming reverent. He pointed a firm, steady finger at the old man in the janitor's clothes. "This man, this is Arthur Vance, the architect. And he did not build this monstrosity. He built legends. He built the Hawthorne Conservatory, the St. Jude's Children's Hospital, the Triton Tower, which redefined the modern skyscraper. He built structures that will stand for 1,000 years, not because of the materials he used, but because of the integrity with which he built them." The name hung in the air. Arthur Vance. Not Art the janitor. Arthur Vance, the legend. A ripple of shock and recognition went through the few older guests in the crowd, architects and financiers who knew the name, who knew the stories. They stared at Arthur as if they were seeing a ghost. The reveal was a detonation, and the monologue was its continuing, devastating shockwave. Alistair Blackwood was not finished. He was a conductor of this symphony of destruction, and he was just reaching the crescendo. He kept his hand on Arthur's shoulder, a silent, public alliance. "This man," he boomed, his voice now echoing with the full force of his authority, "taught me everything I know. Not about business, about honor, about the sacred trust between a builder and a client, about the simple, unshakable principle that a man's name is the only thing he truly owns." He turned his piercing gaze, now white-hot with contempt, back to Daniel and Chloe. He had a partner who betrayed him, a man who nearly destroyed his firm. And what did Arthur do? Did he run? Did he declare bankruptcy? No. He sacrificed everything, his fortune, his reputation, his entire public life, to ensure that every single person, from the wealthiest client to the lowest paid laborer, was made whole. He paid every debt. He honored every contract. He walked away with nothing but the clothes on his back and his own quiet integrity. The silence in the room was no longer just quiet. It was a physical presence. It was the sound of 100 shallow realities colliding with one massive, undeniable truth. The weight of it was suffocating. "He disappeared," Blackwood continued, his voice resonating with the tragedy and grandeur of the story. "He became a ghost, a legend whispered about in boardrooms and at architectural schools. People have spent decades trying to find him, to learn from him. The greatest architectural minds of our time consider him a foundational figure, a master who simply vanished." He took a deliberate step towards Daniel, who seemed to shrink under his gaze, his face the color of ash. "And you are his son. You carry his name, a name he sanctified with his own sacrifice. And you dared to forge it. You used his name, the name he chose to hide in honor, to commit fraud. You used it to build this monument to your own hollow greed and your pathetic, staggering ignorance." The accusation landed, and the world of Daniel and Chloe shattered into a million pieces. The house, their symbol of arrival, was now a crime scene. Their guests, their so-called friends, were now the jury. Blackwood wasn't done. He pulled out his own sleek, black smartphone. "I took the liberty of making a call on the way over. To a personal friend of mine. He happens to be the president of Sterling Trust Bank." He looked directly at Daniel, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "The fraudulent loan that was secured with your father's forged signature has been dealt with. The entire mortgage has been canceled. In its place, a federal investigation has been opened into your business practices and into the bank officials who were complicit in this fraud. This property," he said, with a final, dismissive wave of his hand, "is now an asset subject to seizure. Men will be here in the morning to change the locks." He took another step closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that everyone in the room could hear. "You see, Daniel, you made a critical miscalculation. You assumed your father was a nobody. You assumed his name was worthless. And you were wrong. Arthur Vance's signature on a janitor's paycheck might not be worth much. But the name Arthur Vance on a formal complaint of felony fraud against a major financial institution? My boy, that name still moves mountains." The aftermath was a wasteland of silence and shame. The beautiful, vibrant party had become a funeral. Daniel and Chloe stood frozen, their faces pale masks of shock, humiliation, and raw, primal terror. The world they had so carefully constructed, a world of illusion and aspiration, had been publicly and brutally dismantled in a matter of minutes. Their important guests, the city councilmen, the socialites, the venture capitalists, now looked at them with a mixture of pity and scorn. They began to back away, whispering to each other, creating a physical buffer zone as if shame were a contagious disease. They quietly retrieved their coats and slipped out the door, eager to escape the wreckage. The house was no longer a symbol of their success. It was the tombstone of their reputation. Arthur Vance finally looked at his son. He looked into Daniel's eyes and saw not a man, but the terrified child he had tried so hard to protect 2 decades ago. There was no triumph in Arthur's gaze, no hint of "I told you so." There was only a vast, deep, and profound sadness. A sorrow for a son who had learned all the wrong lessons, who had chased glittering reflections and ignored the solid gold he held in his hands. He did not say a word. Words were no longer necessary. The truth had been spoken, and its echo was deafening. He bent down slowly, his old joints protesting, and picked up the small, carved kingfisher from the marble floor. He walked to a nearby console table, a monstrosity of chrome and black glass, and gently placed the wooden bird upon its surface. In the cold, sterile environment, the small piece of hand-carved oak seemed to glow with an inner warmth. It was the only object of true, handcrafted beauty of real value in the entire house. Alistair Blackwood came to his side and placed a firm, supportive hand on his shoulder. "Come, Arthur," he said softly. "Let's go. There's a project I've been waiting 20 years to discuss with you. A real one." Arthur looked at his old friend, and for the first time that night, a faint, weary smile touched his lips. He gave a single slow nod. He turned his back on the ruins of his son's life, on the house of lies, on the shame that now filled the room like a toxic gas. His back was straight, his shoulders squared. The janitor's uniform seemed to fall away, replaced by an invisible mantle of dignity. He walked out of the house and into the cool night air, never once looking back. He was leaving quietly, the same way he had lived his life for the past 20 years. He was free. Across the room, Maya, the young caterer, watched him go. Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling. She had been a witness to something extraordinary. A quiet man had been revealed as a king, and a palace had been exposed as a prison. She finally understood the quiet greatness she had sensed in him, the immense weight of the life he carried in his stoic silence. She knew she would never forget the lesson she had learned tonight, that some people build with steel and glass, and others build with honor. And only one of those structures is built to last. The narrator's voice, a calm and reflective presence, returns as we see the final consequences unfold. Honor is not a house you can build with stolen money, or a reputation you can purchase with deceit. It is a foundation laid stone by stone, with every choice you make, every promise you keep, every day of your life. It is slow, painstaking work, often done in silence and obscurity, but it is the only thing that can withstand the storms of life. Daniel and Chloe lost everything that night. They lost the house, their friends, their future. The next morning, as Blackwood had promised, officials arrived, their cars far less glamorous than his. A cold, official notice of federal forfeiture was slapped onto the grand front door, a paper scar on a monument to greed. We see glimpses of them, pale and diminished, being questioned under the harsh fluorescent lights of a sterile office. Their world, once so full of color and noise, had become a gray, silent prison of their own making. They lost everything because they never understood the incalculable value of what they already had, the legacy of a great and honorable man. They had been born into royalty and had chosen to live as thieves. And Arthur Vance? He did not return to his janitor's closet. He went with his old friend. He did not ask for his old life back, for the fame or the fortune. He had no need for it. Instead, he and Alistair Blackwood established a new foundation, a non-profit dedicated to building things that mattered. We see sketches, not of skyscrapers, but of community centers in impoverished neighborhoods. We see blueprints for homeless shelters designed with dignity and light. We see models for beautiful, affordable housing complexes, structures with soul, built for people who needed a place to feel safe. Arthur Vance was building again. He never gave an interview. He never attended a gala in his honor. He found his reward not in the applause, but in the quiet hum of a well-built space, in the knowledge that his work was providing shelter and hope. He had reclaimed his name not by shouting it, but by simply living it. True wealth is never what you own or what you display. It is the integrity you carry inside your heart, the character that defines you when no one is watching. What do you believe is the most important lesson that Daniel and Chloe were forced to learn that fateful night? Let us know your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. We read every one. And for more stories like this, stories that remind us of the enduring power of character and the quiet strength of humility, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Moral Compass Stories. Because sometimes, in a world full of noise, the quietest people have the most powerful and important stories to tell.